engineer who has worked on some of Australia's biggest infrastructure projects, designing the underground structures that keep our cities moving. As one of the few women in her field, she is passionate about paving the way for others, showing that it is possible to pursue any career, including those in STEM. Alongside her engineering career, Antonia is a certified leadership coach, dedicated to empowering women and early career professionals to step forward with confidence and authenticity, knowing there's no single right way to succeed. Her message is simple. You don't have to fit into a box to make an impact. By staying curious, backing yourself and bringing your authentic self to the table, you can create a career and a life that truly excites you. Can you put your hands together for Antonia?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Linda. I'd actually forgotten what I had written there for that introduction, and it was great because there's some words in there which I think are going to pop up throughout my keynote, so thank you. Hey everyone, how are we? Good. Bit tired, bit sleepy, still waking up. Awesome. So as Linda said, I am a tunnel engineer for a company called Arcadis here in Victoria. But would it be okay with you all if I didn't really talk too much about what I do as an engineer and spoke a little bit more about the things that I've learned over the last few years? Cool. We're doing a Q&A after, so if you have any questions about engineering, feel free to ask. But the things that I've probably learned since I graduated university are a little bit different to maybe some of the stuff we might usually be used to hearing. So is it okay if I did that with you all today? So it was about 5 years ago today that I finished my last university exam in engineering. Now, I don't know how things are done in Victoria. I'm originally from South Australia, but our exams are done in these huge halls, which almost feel like warehouses, where there's just plain concrete floors and just rows and rows and rows and rows of desks. Same here, getting some nods. Awesome. And it's a little bit daunting. It's always cold for some reason. Could be 30 degrees, could be 10 degrees, it doesn't matter. It's freezing cold in there. So you're all rubbed up, heads down, and all you hear is just the scribbles of all of us just writing on our papers, the occasional page turn, the footsteps of the supervisors always looking over your shoulder, making sure you're not cheating, and maybe just the tick of a clock. Sounds a bit crazy, doesn't it? But we did it because that's what we had to do to be able to get the degree. And I still remember on that last exam when I'm just walking out the back of the room and there's just this wall of just doors, floor to ceiling, and 30 degrees outside. Of course, it's Adelaide, it's summer. And all I felt was relief. I was like, yes, this is finally over. 5 years of stress, assignments, papers, exams, tests, just all of this stuff. It was finally done. And then that meant that I was ready, right? I was ready for the real world. It was finally time. But if only I knew then what I know now. I'd be curious if maybe, just maybe, I would have felt a little bit different walking out of those doors. And it wasn't all about finally letting go of this stress, and maybe I'd appreciated it a little bit differently. And I know you've all heard it before. Who's had a parent or an older person say, you know nothing now, you wait till you're in your 40s. Yeah, we've all heard it. And maybe it kind of sounds like I'm saying the same thing again. I get it. I was a genius back then, and I knew everything. There was no way you could tell me what I was going to know in 20 years. No. But the stuff that I've learned over the last 5 years is stuff that a textbook couldn't teach me. It's stuff that I had to learn doing life. And doing a life coaching course, as you kind of briefly, and I'll touch on that a bit later. But this is the stuff that shifted my perspective on how I just did things in general. To summarize all of that in about 20 minutes, a bit of a task. But there's 3 things that sort of stood out to me of the things that I've learned over the last 5 years. So would it be okay with you if I share with you those 3 things? Would it be okay if we kept a bit of an open mind about what those things might be? And would it be okay if I'm just a little bit vulnerable with you all about my experience? Cool. Because full transparency, me being an engineer wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. It wasn't always hunky-dory. It's the best thing I've ever did. For about a year and a half, 2 years of my career, I spent it wanting to run away. I thought engineering wasn't for me. They're all dull and boring. Everything's just process and systems, and it's just no fun. And this isn't for me. I'm too cool for this. Like, let's get out of here. Which kind of sucked. There was a lot of stress, a lot of, oh my god, what am I doing with my life? A lot of identity stuff. What am I doing? Am I even an engineer? What does this even mean? All of the stuff that no one really told me about. And so I knew what I didn't want. I decided already I wasn't going to be an engineer. This isn't for me. But I had no idea what I did want. Funny that. And then I remember there was one night where I was sitting behind the computer screen and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because I had no idea. And I was just scrolling LinkedIn. Have you heard of LinkedIn? Oh, we know what LinkedIn is. I was just scrolling LinkedIn, going to different people's profiles and seeing what do they do. Oh, I don't know, stop going to the next person, trying to find the link in the chain. And I was in my early 20s, odds are I was probably doing some Instagram doom scrolling. That's okay. And I was trying to just ask myself some questions, who inspires me? Who do I look at and I'm like, I want to be like you. And there was one name that stood out to me. And his name is John Maxwell. Has anyone heard of him? That's okay. Oh, some maybes. Okay. So John Maxwell is actually a leadership coach over in the States. And I remember reading some of his books and listening to some of his talks and thinking, he sounds pretty cool. He's all about self-leadership, empowerment, all of this really cool, fun, uplifting sort of stuff. Maybe you've seen some sort of similar energy things on Instagram or TikTok. Just that sort of vibe. And I loved it. I thought it was awesome. But John Maxwell was, I think he's in his 60s, a year-old man, over in the States, who used to be a pastor. So odds are I wasn't going to be John Maxwell. But I liked what he did. So I started looking for just people who'd been associated with him, anything. And I stumbled across a man named Mike, I think his name was, who'd actually done some work with John Maxwell. And so I jumped on a call with him and we had a chat and he's like, yeah, I'm a coach. I'm like, coach? What does that even mean? I don't know. Just curious, has anyone heard of coaching? Hands up, a few? Yeah. I didn't know what it was. So I did some Googling, some searching, and it sounded like this really cool thing that I wanted to explore. Next thing you knew it, I came across the Life Coaching College, which is a college here in Victoria, and I'd signed up for a 2-year master's degree to become a life coach. So I decided just then, engineering no more, life coaching is where I want to be. Awesome, great, cool, a decision made, done. The funny thing about doing a life coaching course though, is you don't just learn how to be a coach, you get coached. And so the sort of coaching that I'm talking about isn't just where do you want to be in 5 years, let's sort of plan to get there, which is great and all a part of it. But it was also exploring what patterns I was playing out in life. Why I was always stressed, why I was always anxious, why I was always on the go and never stopped and just burning myself out at both ends. Because it played out in every area of my life. And something I started to realize was that I was approaching everything with a fixed mind. Just like engineering, I had already decided it wasn't for me. So everything that I was doing was reinforcing that engineering was not for me. So no wonder I wasn't enjoying it. I'd already decided it wasn't mine. It wasn't fun, it was boring. And then something started to shift. I learned that curiosity can turn pain into pleasure. I started to look at my career through a different lens. It was no longer the thing that I needed to run away from. It was the thing that I got to explore. And so I started asking questions. And I was like, what is this thing? What is engineering? What can I learn? What can I gain? What can I learn from these things? And I started to see engineering for what it really was. And it's actually a place where there's lots of creativity. There's lots of cool things that I get to do. I want to work on infrastructure that shapes the way that we fundamentally do things. Has anyone heard of the Northeast Link project? Yeah. Or the Melbourne Metro project that's happening right now. Cool. Suburban Rail Loop. Yeah. This is all the stuff that I've got to do. Plus I've got to travel the world. I've been to the Netherlands with my company. I've been interstate with my company. And I got to do all this really cool, fun stuff. But I wasn't seeing it before because I was fixed. And I wasn't seeing things through the lens of curiosity. Does that make sense? So my first lesson was, how do I start to approach life through the lens of curiosity? Because the second I did, I started asking more questions and being open to opportunities rather than just believing I could only get what I thought I was going to get out of an experience. Things started to shift. And the funny thing is, I started noticing that the people around me weren't actually doing that. And there's one story that actually popped up, probably about 2 years, year and a half into my degree, where I was sitting in a meeting, and it was all on Zoom because everything's Teams nowadays, and I was sitting in a meeting with the graduates in the company. And it was a meeting with some of our senior leaders, and they were really, really curious as to what it was that we wanted to see more of at Arcadis, which is the company I work for. And I was like, what is it that I want to see more of at Arcadis? And the one thing I really felt was lacking was development opportunities. Opportunities for me to learn, to grow, to become a better human, to become a better engineer. And I wanted more of it. And so that's what I said. The thing is though, after I told them that's what I wanted, I sat back and I listened. What do the other graduates want? I want more money. I want a pay raise. I want to make sure that in 2 years I'm no longer a graduate. Okay, cool. Nothing wrong with that, makes sense. Full transparency, I started feeling like maybe I should be asking for more of that stuff because at the time I wasn't really thinking about it. The funny thing happened a few months later, where I was actually in a salary review. Does everyone know what a salary review is? Yeah. Every year you kind of do a bit of a review of your progress, get some feedback, and you get a pay rise. And I sat there and they kind of sit with your team and they put up a piece of paper and say, here's your new salary and this is a percentage increase. I was like, okay, cool. Sat down with my boss. 9.6% was the number. I was like, okay, I think that's good. I don't really know. So I asked him, what's the sort of norm? And he goes, well, most people get around 3-4%. Okay. Then why was I getting 9? And of course I asked him, and he goes, the way you're operating, the level at which you're operating is above what you're doing as a graduate. You can see that you're focused on growth. You're focused on becoming a better engineer, both technically and just professionally. And we can see the impact it's having on the rest of the team. I never really cared about the money. I didn't focus on the money. It wasn't about how can I become the next level up. It was how can I be a better engineer? To become a better engineer, how do I need to operate? How do I want to operate? That's what I was focusing on. And then I started doing the stuff that made me a better engineer. Turns out I was a good one. And then the money came. So that was my second lesson. Focus on who you need to be in order to get to where you want, rather than focusing on what you want. Yes, having clarity around what you want and where you want to get in life, yeah, look, my thing's changed about 3 times already, as I'm sure you can hear just in my stories. That's great. But rather than focusing on how do I get the stuff, I found that focusing on who I need to become first meant the stuff was going to come anyway. Most of my life I was focused on making sure I got the piece of paper to get the degree, which led to stress and anxiety. I was focused on how do I get the next job, or get the next thing, or do this stuff to get to the next thing, which just left me in this vicious loop of constantly feeling like I was just never there. But the second I started focusing on me and who I wanted to become, things started shifting. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if I focus on how I can be a good engineer, start doing the stuff and being a good engineer, the rest started to come. Alright, so that's the first two lessons. Stay curious and focus on who you want to be first. You ready for number 3? Good. I like that. Number 3 was, it's always my choice. Does that make sense to you guys? You'd be okay if I just shared some stories around that. So, towards the end of my coaching degree, I was in a bit of a weird place because engineering started to be fun. I got to realise that I was like working on infrastructure that shaped Victoria. Everything that I was doing, we're all going to use at some point in our lives, and I got to be a part of that and actually make that happen. And it was this fun, creative space where I got to look at tunnels and how tunnels work and how can I actually design a tunnel in a way that it's not going to collapse. Like, that was really cool stuff. I got to travel, I got to do all this really cool other stuff with it too. I wrote a paper, it was really cool. But I also loved this coaching thing. I was like, awesome, I get to actually understand people. I get to work with people to understand for what reason they might not feel happy, for what reason they might feel stressed, feel stuck. Unpack that, explore that, and give them everything that they needed to achieve anything that they wanted in life. And that was really, really cool too. But I felt split. In my head, I decided that engineering and coaching couldn't be together. They were not aligned, they were not the same thing. I could either be one or the other, but I felt like I was both. I was a bit lost and confused, and anything I tried to do as a coach felt really heavy. I felt stressed and anxious, funny that. And I was stuck. And then it clicked. It's my choice. I'd already decided again that it was either coaching or engineering. It couldn't be both. But I woke up one day and I was like, is that true? What if I chose to believe that it wasn't? What if I believed that the two worlds could collide and I could bring them together and I could be both? So I made the decision and I chose that I was both. And that's really, really cool. So I went to work one day and I said, hey guys, I've done this coaching thing and it's really cool. Can I do it at work too? They looked at me and they said, go for it. And then everything started to change. Because I chose to believe that it was possible. I then started running workshops at my company with some of our young professionals, teaching them all the stuff that I'd learned coaching. I then started running workshops with Engineers Australia for women in the space and really started to work with different people and show women that they have everything and the value that we bring to this industry. I started doing speaking events, presented a paper. I just started doing all of this other stuff where I was the engineer and the coach because I made the choice. But I was. Because the choice is mine. Does that make sense? And I know that can be a little bit scary sometimes because you kind of get to a point where it's a bit like, oh, if it's my choice, then it's all on me. And the person that I was, I took on all the responsibility, and even that started to feel heavy sometimes. But it's also this really empowering thing when you realise I can choose whatever I want. I can be whoever I want. I can do whatever I want. And that's a really, really cool place to be. Full transparency, I'm a human, just FYI. And so I have my moments where I just get sad and depressed and not want to do anything and just kind of hate the world and hate everything. Yeah, okay, that's part of it. But with the three things of staying curious, focusing on who I want to be, and realizing it's my choice, things started to shift. Things started flowing, coming more naturally. And even though there are some bad days, there are a lot of good days in there too. And I'm okay with the bad days, because I'm choosing to sit in the bad days sometimes. It's my choice. And that's pretty cool. So stay curious. Focus on who you want to be. And realize it's your choice. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonia. That was absolutely inspirational, and I really love the key messages, and they're simple but incredibly powerful. So thank you very much. We do have some time for some questions, and I do have a microphone here that I might get maybe a couple of the mentors up the back, if you could do the running for me with the microphone. Who has a question for Antonia, please?